Hi everyone, welcome to January's security session. Security sessions is where you can hear about Microsoft security products, updates around those, dive deeper into the detail, get some demonstrations and hear about specific topics with subject matter experts. So you all know me, I'm Tom Wild, I'm a cloud solution architect at Microsoft. Carl, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course, thanks Tom. Hello everybody, my name's Carl Kochar. I'm a partner technical architect working in the UK organisation alongside Tom. I'm here today to run through some data governance and e-discovery demonstrations for you.
Thanks, Carl. So based on the votes from the last security session we did on protecting information, this session's more about compliance and specifically compliance within Office 365. And I think that people voted for that because we all know what's happening in May and becoming enforceable by May. So these are the top cloud concerns that we hear about: security, compliance, and transparency. And from a security perspective, I'm a firm believer that there's far more security in the cloud than people actually have on premises. So that's including your physical security with your CCTV, your biometrics, your human process barriers that you have in place on site. But then also IT security with your traditional network security and firewalls and things like that. And then add to that your modern security techniques as well. All of those can really be turned on within minutes. And we spoke about one of those last month with Azure Information Protection. It only takes a few minutes to deploy and roll out to hundreds of thousands, really. And then in terms of compliance, Microsoft do a massive amount in terms of assisting customers and helping those achieve compliance. And for anyone else that's interested, I always guide them towards the Microsoft Trust Center, as it really details everything that's done from certifications we have in each of our data centers to framework recommendations and absolutely loads about the upcoming GDPR, which everyone's going to be viewing a lot more by May. And also coming up soon is lots about Microsoft's Compliance Manager, which is really about helping customers understand their data protection and their compliance situation from a single unified dashboard as well. And transparency. So Microsoft really believe that you have a right to as much information as possible about how Microsoft handle your data in the cloud. So if you look at the Trust Center, that explains about how your data is stored, about who has access to it and under what circumstances. And you can also view independent audit reports and certifications to confirm those standards as well. So if we move to the next slide, Carl. So as I mentioned, there's a massive amount in Office 365 to do with compliance, from archiving, retention, encryption, ethical rules, data loss prevention. It's absolutely enormous. We won't be focusing on all of them because we'll be here forever, but there's three main areas that Microsoft are focusing on, and Carl, our demo god's going to walk us through a couple of them. So I'll run through data governance and then I'll pass it over to Carl. So data governance is all about keeping your data when you need it and then removing it when you don't. So you can manage that full content lifecycle, and you can import data from various sources. You can upload it through a self-service portal or send us an encrypted drive and we can plug it in, and you can choose what data you upload. So you don't need to upload 100%. You can choose and customize how much you do. And then also you can import from social integrations as well, your Facebooks, your Twitters, and etc. You can also create retention policies to comply with industry regulations. So if you think about keeping data for as long as you're required, but no longer, so kind of like GDPR in certain instances with regards to personal identifiable information, you might only be allowed access to a certain part of data for a set period of time. That's a use case for retention policies. And you can even create specific policies for certain groups, such as your finance group, because they would have different requirements to your sales groups. And you can also allow your users to start classifying data themselves and kind of putting the power in their hands as well. So that's quite useful. And there's also monitoring features as well, so you can define policies to capture email and third-party communications as well, so they can be examined by reviewers. And Advanced data governance as well improves upon all of this and gives you proactive policy recommendations and automatic data classification. And kind of across the Microsoft board, really, the advanced features have a lot of artificial intelligence and machine learning in there as well. Much like we discussed last month about information protection, the advanced features of that has recommendations picking up certain parts of data saying, hey, this contains PII data. It's much the same with the Office advanced components as well, specifically advanced data governance in this case. So Carl, do you want to set the scene about kind of the demo and walk us through?
Of course, yeah, thanks Tom. So first thing I'll do, I'll just switch over to the Office 365 portal. And we'll switch over to the data governance dashboard. So let me set the scene. I think it's true to say that with storage requirements rapidly growing, it's becoming increasingly challenging to identify what data you need to keep and what data you really should discard. So in Office 365, data governance tools allow us to retain the data that's really important to you, but then also purge data that is irrelevant. Now, the ability to label and apply governance policies in an organization helps protect them from both litigation and also data breaches. To provide that good understanding of the data governance tools we have available in Office 365, I'm just going to run through some demonstrations that cover a basic company-wide retention policy, and then I've got a couple of labeling policy demos, each linked to a different retention policy, and then finally we're going to finish off with something called a supervision policy. So in our demonstration scenario, we're using Megan Bowen's account, and she's a data governance manager at a company called Contoso, and she's responsible for creating and managing data governance policy that just meet Contoso's business requirements. So we're going to start with the data governance dashboard, and this dashboard really just helps Megan stay on top of what's happening with data in Contoso. The dashboard is made up of a series of snapshots or widgets that provide information on the status of the content held in the organization, really just over time. And it has information on archiving, it has retention policy information, and also deletion information within the organization as well. Now, in our scenario, Contoso has just recently completed its migration to Office 365, so Megan now just needs to start to use her tools to start to put some retention policy rules in place. So the first policy that we're going to create is a company-wide retention policy. So I press the create button, I'll give it a name, I'll say company-wide policy. And normally I'd add quite a lengthy description to tell others what this policy does, but we'll just cut and paste the name for the sake of the demonstration. Press next, and then that takes me into the detail of my retention policy. So in terms of Contoso, Megan's been told that their default policy is 5 years. And we're going to base the policy upon the date when the data was created. We could optionally say we will implement the policy from when it was last modified, but the Contoso policy is 5 years from when the data was created, and after this time Contoso's default policy states that the data is just going to be deleted. Now at the bottom here we do have some advanced settings that we could apply. We're going to look at those later in one of the labeling demonstrations. So after we've set the retention settings, we choose the locations. Our policy is company-wide, so we're going to cover all locations, but if we wanted to, we could start to include or exclude different locations within our Office 365 tenant to meet a requirement, but we're going to use the blanket setting and cover all locations in the company-wide policy. Now the next thing that we need to decide upon is whether we're going to have something called a preservation lock turned on. So the one thing you need to understand is that after a policy has been locked, you'll only really be able to add new locations, new areas of the tenant to search or extend the retention and deletion period. No one will actually be able to turn off the policy, delete it, or make any other changes. So before you lock a policy, you really do need to decide or ensure that it aligns with the organisation's compliance requirements. Now, this is required in certain verticals, such as the finance industry. But the good news is for Contoso, they're not a bank, they don't work in finance, so they're not going to turn on the preservation lock for their company-wide policy. If you note one thing at the top, it says that the policy will take up to a day to be applied. So again, always factor this delay or delta into any execution on a policy that you want to invoke. And the next thing is we just create the policy. And after about a day's time, you should see this policy being applied to all of the data across all of the users in the tenant. So the next thing we're going to do is create a label for the sales team and allocate a retention policy to that, and that label then will be manually applicable to documents across the tenant for sales. So the first thing we do is create the label. We give it a friendly name, we'll call it sales team data.
So this is different to the labels that we spoke about last month in terms of Azure Information Protection labels, because it's worth noting that you've got data governance labels in Office 365, and then you've got Azure Information Protection labels in which it's in EMS as well. And it's worth noting that at this point the two systems can't read each other's labels, so you would need both Azure Information Protection and Advanced Data Governance labels to kind of do their own thing. So advanced data governance is more about retaining and deleting data and things like that, whereas Azure Information Protection, you can classify, label data based on sensitivity, and you add protection and visual markings and encryption and things like that. But at this point in time, they don't talk to each other, so they're kind of administered from two separate areas. But it's my understanding that in the future they are going to start to come together, and there will be a single place for kind of labels across the whole of Microsoft 365.
Thanks, Tom. So moving on with the demonstration, the next thing to point out is that we have description fields for admins, but also for users. Now, in a live policy, those descriptions probably would be quite different and be designed to be meaningful for the audience that are going to read them. But in our demonstration, we're just going to cut and paste the name of the label into each of these. We're going to turn on the retention policy. Now, the default policy was 5 years, but the sales team, for their own business reasons, want to keep their documentation around for 7 years. So we're going to keep the default there. But like the default policy, they are also, at the end of 7 years, going to delete the content automatically.
So which one wins then, Carl, if you have data which falls under two retention policies?
It's the one with the longest period associated with it. So in this case, the sales data would be available for 2 years after the default policy has expired.
Okay.
So the next thing that we're going to do is create the label. And once the label has created, we're going to publish the label so that it's then available to sales users to assign to their different documents. So let's publish this label. We want it applicable to all locations. Again, as I showed in the previous company-wide policy, we could choose specific areas of the tenant we want to apply it to, but we're choosing all locations. We're giving the policy a name. Let's call it sales team data. And I'll just cut and paste this into the description. Again, normally you'd make this quite meaningful, very meaningful, and we'll review it. Notice that it does take a day for the label to appear, or we'll publish it. So normally we'd have to wait for a day, but because this is a demonstration, what I've done is on a different tenant, I prepared a label just as an example of how this is implemented from the end user perspective. So if we navigate to a OneDrive for a user on a different tenant, you'll see that we've got a marketing document here, and we can choose to apply, in this case, a marketing data label, which will be linked to its own retention policy within that tenant, and now this marketing document will be labelled accordingly. Okay, now that's good, and I think it's really useful for the sales team to be able to label their data manually. But for critical data in the business, in our demonstration, Megan's going to create an auto-applied label policy, and really that's intended to minimise the risk of applying either the wrong retention policy to a document or not applying it at all, and hence exposing Contoso to risk. So in our example, Megan's now going to create a policy that covers any UK-specific personal data, and I think that's quite relevant to GDPR, as Tom alluded to earlier. And as this is sensitive data, her initial policy in this case is only going to last for 1 year, and at the end of 1 year it's going to require something called disposition review. And disposition review is really just a case of a human or a team of humans looking at that data and then making a decision about whether that data should be retained, deleted, or maybe relabeled. So let's create our next policy. So let's call it sensitive data. And we'll just cut and paste the name, but normally we would put meaningful descriptions here. We'll turn on the retention policy, we'll set it for 1 year, and here you can see we'll trigger a disposition review. You can allocate a team of people to this, for example the legal team, but in this instance, because it's a demo, we're going to make Megan Bowen the reviewer. Okay, so we've created that. We press next, review the settings and create the label. So now we're ready to publish. We could manually publish the label so that it could be applied by individuals, but we're going to auto label everything using more advanced data governance capabilities within the tenant. So the first thing we're going to do is choose the conditions. We're going to apply the label based on sensitive information. We could use keywords or phrases to identify information, as shown in the second option here. But what happens is that we have a set of built-in templates available within the tenant which contain sensitive information types: financial, medical, and private. We do have the option to create custom policies where you can group as many or as little of the 80+ sensitive information types together. So in our policy though, we said we'd track on UK information, so let's choose the UK, and we said we choose private information or around all of the individuals, whether they be our employees or even our customers or partners, that we have within our tenant. And as you can see, we can start to select different types of personal details so that we can start to review this after a year. So we've got this label. We're going to give it a policy a friendly name, call it sensitive information. We normally give it a meaningful description, as I said. Cut and paste in this instance. We choose our locations. We're going to go for all locations. Again, we could be more specific if necessary. We'll review. Now notice here that actually for auto application of labels it does take up to 7 days, so factor this into any production deployment. We auto apply, and then after 7 days we should start to see all our sensitive UK private information labelled accordingly, have that 1 year retention period, which will then come up for disposition review by Megan to make a judgment call on whether that data should be retained or purged from the tenant. So the final thing we're going to look at now is something called a supervision review. Now Megan has been made aware of something called Project Falcon. So Project Falcon really deals with the potential acquisition Contoso are planning to make. Now, as part of the corporate's governance being applied to this strategic initiative, the executive team actually want to review a sample of all email correspondence that is associated with the project. So we're going to actually sort of track the correspondence of two of the individuals associated with the project, a person called Adele and a person called Alex, and they are the project leads. So let's create the supervision policy. We give it a friendly name. Let's just call it Project Falcon. We'll choose the users to supervise. As I mentioned, this is going to be Adele in this instance. We could have groups of people, and Alex is the other lead.
So anything sent to or from them to each other is going to pop up.
That's right, yes. By default, it's inbound and outbound traffic, but we can actually do to and from by selecting the eternal option. We can also add a condition here. So to cut down the amount of traffic that Megan or the executive team in real life would need to review, is we can put keywords in there as an option. So we're going to say, in this case, we're looking for a keyword Falcon, which identifies it as being associated with the project, and then we'll go next. Now normally this would be quite a low percentage because you wouldn't want to review all of the correspondence. You just want to have a subset under review, but because this is a demonstration, we're going to bump this up to 100%, so everything that's generated around Project Falcon actually ends up in the supervisor's email account. And the reviewer could be the executive team as shown here, but we're not going to do that. We're going to select Megan. And then we create the policy.
So in terms of viewing that, Carl, how does that look from an end user experience? Like, what does the reviewer have to do now? Does it come up in their inbox?
Yes, what happens is that after a period of time, and it's only a couple of minutes, that the reviewer actually gets a new folder within their email account, which actually has the name of the supervision policy in it, and then all of the percentage, in this case 100% of emails that are generated based on the policy that we set up, will be populated into that supervisory folder. Now, one thing that should be noted is that you can view the correspondence, but you can't delete it, so you can't start to delete it. But once a policy is actually deleted from the Office 365 tenant, then that supervisory folder actually is removed from the reviewer's email account automatically.
Right, okay. And that's the same on OWA, so Outlook Web Access, and the thick client as well.
It is, but the supervisory folder is added automatically on OWA, but on a thick client there are some further steps you need to do to make that folder appear, and that's well documented in the public domain.
Gotcha.
Okay, so let's try and generate this test. So I've navigated to Adele's inbox. We're going to create a new email and we're going to send it to Alex. And I'm going to give it a title as confidential because this is an acquisition that we're talking about here. But I'm going to say Falcon is go. And let's send it. Right, so the email's been sent. So if we now navigate back to Megan's email box, I'll just refresh your email account. And we see now we can see the supervision folder, and it's labeled Project Falcon. We open it up, we can see there's an email in there, and there we go, Falcon is go. So those are the demos that I had prepared for data governance. I'm going to hand you back over to Tom, and he's going to talk about eDiscovery.
Cool, good demos, Carl. Yeah, so just a high-level overview of eDiscovery. So eDiscovery is all about helping customers quickly identify relevant data during investigative, legal, and regulatory exercises, whilst also decreasing costs, risk, and the time that it takes to do so. Then some of the features include case management, search, hold, analyze, and then exporting that data. And much like advanced data governance, advanced e-discovery really improves on this using AI and ML. So instead of sifting through millions of files to find the ones that you're after, you can review some, and then advanced e-discovery starts to learn based on whether you say something's relevant or not relevant. It starts to understand and build up a pattern. So it also helps by finding near duplicate files, reconstructing email threads, and identifying the key themes and data relationships. So it starts to become really accurate in presenting you with the information that it thinks relevant to you. So again, kind of massively saving you time and therefore money in kind of reviewing cases and things like that. So Carl, do you want to take us through a demo of e-discovery?
Of course, yes. So just switch over to the Office 365 portal. So in this example, what we're going to do is actually create an e-discovery search basically for one of Contosso's partners, and it's a company called Enron. And Contosso do a lot of businesses with Enron, and there is some litigation surrounding that organisation. So one of the things that Megan needs to do is to create a search around lobbying in California, and the Contosso executive team just want to be prepared in case they're subpoenaed to give evidence. So the two parts of the business under investigation are firstly the account manager, a chap by the name of Irvin Sayers, and also the whole of the finance team. So the first thing that we're going to do is create a new case, and we'll call it California Lobbying. I'll abbreviate that. Give it a description. We save it, and then all we have to do is open the case, and we're presented with some options. Now the first thing we're going to do is put the email accounts of the people and team in question on hold. So we select the hold option, and we give it a name. Let's just call it CA Lobbying again. And we choose the relevant email account. So we're going to say it's Irvin. And once we found him, we add him, and then we'll look for the finance team. Do our search. There's our finance team. Add those individuals. Right, we could also add SharePoint sites here, but we're not going to do that for the sake of this demonstration. Press next. We could, rather than doing a blanket hold across everything, we could actually look for keywords and also conditions for the hold. And this could be anything from dates or senders to participants to authors to titles in content. So we can actually narrow down the hold, but we're not going to. We're going to do a blanket hold on everything. And then once we've implemented that hold, we actually can then start our standard e-discovery search. So we'll just wait for that to save. Now we're going to create our search. First thing that we're going to do is give it a name. And in this case, we're going to search everywhere. So we're going to search for Exchange, SharePoint, and also public folders. And we are going to use a keyword now, or a set of keywords. We're going to use the keyword California. Search is going to look for California within our emails and documents, or, because we can use a Boolean term here, to also look for lobby. And because we're using a wildcard star, we can look for the term lobbying as well. We can add conditions here, but we're not going to. And then we're just going to carry out our search. So after a couple of minutes, because the actual amount of content in this tenant isn't huge, we should return the results, which will then allow us to do a preview. And what a preview lets us do is actually look at up to 200 documents where we've found relevant content. So just to ensure that the search is producing the right type of output before we export it. So let's have a preview.
That was pretty quick at searching through your tenant there, Carl.
Yes, and it does depend. I mean, it is purely down to the amount of data that you need to search through. If you've got terabits of data, it's going to take longer than if you've got megabits, to be quite frank. But the nice thing here is we can actually make an informed decision about whether we're picking up the keywords. It looks like we are. We can look at email addresses. Yes, there's the word Enron there, so that's interesting. We are picking up the right type of correspondence. We'll have one more look. There we go. So yeah, this looks good to me. So we'll close it down. And then finally, we could either export the content to produce or to do a standard e-discovery review. But we also, because on this tenant we have an E5 license, we could prepare the results for advanced e-discovery, which we're not going to do in this demonstration as it would take too long, but we prepare the results and then we switch to e-discovery and review the data under advanced e-discovery. But at this point, I'm going to hand back to Tom, and I think he's going to finish off by talking about auditing.
Cool, thanks, Carl. Good demos. So auditing within Office 365 is all about helping monitor and investigate actions taken on your data. So not only does it kind of look at your user events, but it also helps monitor administrative events as well. So, and that's across SharePoint, OneDrive, Exchange, Azure Active Directory. So it's kind of really key that you've got that user monitoring and administrative monitoring as well, which is fantastic from an admin and security side as well. And something that's worth noting is that there's a REST API in there as well. So much like Microsoft Graph API, Management API is a REST API that helps people integrate with all of this activity data into their own security or compliance or monitoring solutions. And one of the really cool things that we're seeing is we've got lots of independent software vendors that are integrating Office 365 management activity into their own solutions as well, and then adding their own secret source and IP to get extra value from that data as well. But if you're a customer or partner and you just want to have a play with it, definitely go and have a look at some examples on GitHub, because there's plenty of people and kind of open source examples on there that you can utilize and have a play with as well. So that's kind of that is some of the features of Office 365 compliance that we've spoken about today. And thanks very much to Carl for providing some good demos with some good context around it. So please let us know if this session was useful, and have a vote by typing in the aka.ms/security session vote as to what you want for the next session to be, whether it's identity, security, or enterprise mobility, or endpoint. Let us know, and we'll provide a session that's relevant around that. So thanks again to Carl. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next month.